All right, class. So moving forward for where we've been like the past couple of weeks and starting our study on World War I, today we're going to start focusing on main battles that happened in World War I. And as of yesterday, when we made our groups of 4, I'm going to I'm going to do a brief overview of 8 major battles that happened during World War I. And in your groups, I want you to take notes and start writing down kind of like brief facts of what happened over each battle, because as we move forward into next week, your group is going to pick one of these battles and actually do an in-depth study of the battle and then present that into class. So if you guys have any questions, you can ask them. Otherwise, start writing down questions and facts with your groups. So for the first battle we're going to be going over is the Battle of Tannenberg. And this was at the very beginning of the war, and this was Russia versus Germany in this. And so basically what was happening during the very start is Russia started to move up their armies into Poland. You can't really see the map, but basically here's Russia over here, and then they started moving up their armies into Poland. And Germany was already busy starting to move their armies over onto the Western Front, where France and Britain was already starting to move their armies. And so Germany had to quickly mobilize their army and go face off with the Russians. And so the Russians already had their forces settled down really fast, and they had the Russian First Army and the Russian Second Army was both there in Poland. And Germany used trains and mobilized their armies to get over to Poland faster so they can face off with the Russians. And so the Russians were set up in the middle, and Germany used trains and came over and flanked them on the side, and Russia was not expecting Germany to mobilize their army so fast to come and face them. And also Germany had been preparing for World War I for 10 years prior to World War I even starting. So the German army was very high-powered, I guess you could say. They were very good. And the Russians were yes.
Do you think the fact that the Russian Civil War and the Russian unrest, do you think that had a hand in their defeat here, or do you think the Germans just outmaneuvered them?
I definitely think it had a hand in their defeat here, because most of their army was hey, World War I starting. Let's just give the commoners some weapons and throw them out onto the front lines. Where Germany had been building a huge army, and it was big. They were very nationalistic, so serving in the military was one of the highest honors. So it definitely came into play, especially in this battle. Which you can see is Russia outnumbered them 2-1 with their military, and Germany was able to mobilize their army, come in and face off with the Russians and defeat them. And Germany lost 13,000 units in this battle, and the Russians lost an estimated 170,000 in their defeat.
The naturalism of Germany sounds a lot like America today, and how it is a huge honor to serve in the military, and how that really encourages the growth of our military.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting.
Yeah, definitely is. And that's kind of where a lot of the countries were here. They were very in depth with their countries. You see Britain and France, after this, France will fall off after the war and not really have a part to play with the military. But okay, moving on to the next one. This was the first Battle of the Marne, and this is when the German army started to move into. They were already in France, and they were starting to move down from the north and pressuring on Paris. And basically, France had their line. They set up a defensive front just north of Paris to stop the Germans from coming in and taking Paris. And this is the first instance of World War I where trench warfare is going to come into play. This is basically the battle that kind of set the tone for the rest of World War I, and where trench warfare is going to be the way that warfare is going to happen. And so France dug trenches just north of Paris, and then Germany came in and they dug trenches just basically 100 yards, was usually the distance between trench warfare, 100 yards, sometimes even closer. So how trench warfare would work is both sides would be in their trenches, both sides would have artillery behind, and basically whoever was going to rush the other side, so let's say the Germans were pressing the offensive, so they would just shell the French side with artillery for hours long. Like, it's estimated, like, for some battles like this one, like tens of thousands of artillery rounds would start shelling the other side. And after that, the Germans would get out of their trenches, run across like the 100 yards that they had to get to the other trenches, and try to basically kick the French out of their trenches and make them retreat. But they had to run across like 100 yards of open ground in between, so the French would be able to basically slaughter. It was called no man's land because basically everyone would get slaughtered in that land, like trying to run across open ground.
That's where you really need to know how to do your 100-yard dash.
Yeah, right. And so that's basically like how trench warfare would work. It'd shell. Every now and then you would just get out of your trench and run across and maybe somehow make it across and be able to push them out of their trenches. And that's why so many lives died in World War I, and why so many battles like had like hundreds of thousands of men die. It was because it was shelling with artillery, and actually artillery was the had the most caused the most deaths in World War I was artillery shelling, and so this one basically was a very key battle for the French, is because they were able to hold their defensive lines and stop Germany from pushing into Paris. And so this was 5 months into World War I, and being able to stop them from taking Paris set the tone, because then they were able to start their own offensive and start pushing the Germans out of Paris after they defeated them at the Battle of the Marne. And so for the next one is the Battle of Gallipoli, and this is World War I on a totally different front. This was with the British Empire and French and the Ottoman Empire. And so the Ottoman Empire at this time was a part of was with alliance with the Germans, and so the British and the French, they were basically on a standoff on the Western Front with the Germans. So Winston Churchill was having a new strategy of trying to come from around through the Ottoman Empire and then push up into like the southern front of Germany. And so basically, the Australians and New Zealand armies were the main forces at this time because they were still part of the British Empire. So the Australians and New Zealanders landed on the beaches of Gallipoli in the peninsula, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. And the whole goal of this campaign was to be able to land them on the peninsula and then basically just take over the Ottoman Empire. And so it was actually like Winston Churchill thought it was like kind of perfect operation, and he thought it was going to end really quickly. He did not expect that the Ottoman Empire had the military capability to keep the British Empire from actually taking them. But basically what happened is the Australians and New Zealanders landed on the beaches, and the Ottoman Empire had built up a whole coastal defense of fortresses, and there were mountains like right above the beaches. And so basically they just trapped the Australians and the New Zealanders on the beaches because they were trying to fight uphill and try to take the Ottomans out, and which is you're at a very low chance of any kind of attack. Like if you're on the high ground, you have the better chances during all. So basically, it's turned into one of the worst offenses of the Allied forces during World War I. Is because the Ottomans were able to halt that attack and basically push the Allies back into the offensive on the Western Front. For this next one, it's a little different. It's called the Battle of Jutland, and it was the major naval battle during World War I. And this was with the British Empire and the German Empire. And basically, for the beginning of World War I, Britain still had the most powerful navy at this time, and they developed a whole blockade in the Atlantic Ocean to stop Germany from basically having an offensive and trying to move units into England, which was kind of the fear from the beginning. And so Britain automatically formed a blockade outside of Germany to stop any German naval units from moving to England. And so this is 2 years after the start of World War I. Germany was like, I thought it was like a timer saying it was done. Okay, Germany formed their navy and tried to break through the blockade that Britain had set up. Germany was outnumbered 2-1 with their navy units at this time, but they still were like trying to hope they could break through any of it. And so basically, it was a huge navy battle of battleships, and this is the last instance in history where there's a actual naval battle just featuring battleships, because as we move later on into World War II, it's not going to just consist of battleships, it's going to consist of battleships, submarines, aircraft carriers with planes. So this is the last battle just involving battleships, yes.
Do you think the Germans had like really good generals? Because like attacking the greatest navy in the world doesn't seem like a very good idea. And then didn't they try and invade Russia too? So were they did they think they could just like outsmart them, or why would they go against like
no,
the greatest navy?
I like where you're going with that. And like I did say, this was 2 years into the war, and it was like kind of just a standoff, like it was just continued trench warfare. Like the Germans weren't like on the offensive at this time on like any of their fronts. It was kind of just a standoff. So their hope was that they could somehow surprise the British blockade and be able to break through and cause basically cause a diversion to where now if they break through somehow, they're able to start moving forces over there and like totally stir everything that was already happening.
Right.
Like, yes.
So is this like a proto version of like the Blitzkrieg that Hitler used in World War II?
Yes, like with the Panzers
Yeah.
and all of that. Yeah, it's basically hoping to blitz through the blockade, somehow like create a hole in where they can like set up everything.